Hey, third grade, this is your video for math lesson 7.6. So today you are going to need your workbooks. We're going to look at one of the workbook pages. It is page 232. Okay, so pause the video while you go and grab your math workbook. So for today's lesson, we are going to be looking at fractions on the number line part 2. So yesterday we were introduced to fractions on the number line and what that kind of looks like and how it can help us compare fractions. So today we're going to be looking at that a little bit closer and trying to understand fractions on a number line for numbers that sometimes seem a little bit, or fractions that seem a little bit tricky. So that's what we're going to talk about. So to start, we're just going to do 3 quick look cards to talk about fractions. So what fraction would be on this quick look card? Remember, you want to look at how many pieces there are total. That's the denominator. And then how many pieces are shaded in. That's the numerator. Remember, denominator is on the bottom. Numerator is on top. So what would this fraction be? This one would be 1/3. 1/3, which I can write it here for you. 1/3. Oh, made it really small. Here we go. There we are. 1/3, because there are 3 total pieces and one of them is shaded in. What about this one? What would the fraction be for this shape? Look at how many total pieces there are and then how many are filled in. So for this one, there are 2 pieces and one of them is filled in. So this fraction would be 1/2. Because there's 2 pieces, 1 is filled in. And our last quick look card, look at how many total pieces and then how many are filled in. Okay, and then say what you think the fraction is. So this one would be 2/5 because there are 2 parts shaded in, and then there are 5 total pieces in your fraction. So this could have been a strip also, like we talked about fraction strips. There could have been 5 rectangles and 2 of those rectangles filled in. Both of them would represent 2/5. All right, so one of the things that we are going to be talking about is how when you use fractions, these are the ones that I was saying could be a little tricky. When you use fractions, you can have less than 1, you can have a whole, or you could actually have more than 1 or more than 1 whole. So that's what we're going to be talking about. So it says, the red fraction circle piece represents 1 whole apple. So if you remember, the red fraction circle is just 1 circle. So that's a whole apple. And then it says, use pink fraction circle pieces to show half of an apple, 2 halves of an apple, or 3 halves of an apple. Be ready to show what you did. So what I did is I took a picture of it here. So if the red circle is 1 whole apple, half of that apple would be 1 pink piece, right? That's 1/2. If you cut that apple down the middle, you would have half of an apple. Then it says to have 2 halves of an apple. Well, if I have half of an apple and half of an apple and I put them together, I have 1 whole apple. And remember, when you have 2/2, that represents 1. That is the whole. That is 1. Okay? But then it says 3 halves of an apple. Well, if I have half of an apple and half of an apple, that's 1. But then I need to add 1 more half to my apple. So we would have how many whole apples? 1 whole apple plus 1/2. So that would be 3 halves of an apple. So we had 1/2, 2 halves, which is also 1 whole, and then 3 halves, which is 1 whole, and then half of an apple. So that's how you can see what the 1 looks like. So this would be 1 whole apple, less than 1 of an apple, half of an apple, or more than 1 apple, which is like an apple and a half. So when you talk about fractions, I know it sounds kind of crazy and goofy, but you can have less than 1 and you can have more than 1. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at page 232, and this is going to show us fractions on a timeline, or a number line, I should say. And it's going to have less than 1, and more than 1. So you can see what the fractions look like on a number line. That's where number lines are very helpful because it helps, organize the way that they look, the way that fractions look. And it's a little bit easier than looking at them with fraction circles or fraction strips. So this is problem number 1, number line A, on page 232. Okay, so this is where we're going to start. So I need you to turn to page 232. This number line has a 0 and has a 1. Okay, so remember that number lines are tools that show the sequence of numbers, meaning the order of numbers. So number line 1, or number line A, is the distance between 0 and 1. It's showing 0 to 1. The arrows here, so if you see how the number line has arrows on it, that's showing that it goes in either direction. So there's a lot of numbers less than 0. There's a lot of numbers greater than 1. It can go on forever in either direction. And then the tick marks between 0 and 1 show the fraction breakdown. So you're looking at how many spaces there are between 0 and 1. So in this case, it would be 1, 2, 3. There are 3 spaces on the number line. One of the parts of a number line that can be kind of confusing is the tick marks and then the spaces. So the lines are just showing you where the fraction is. Like this here shows you, like, this is the fraction we're trying to figure out, the distance from between 0 and that point. But the part of the fraction that we're so used to for the fraction circles and the fraction strips, that's this part in between. So for this one, we would say how many spaces are there between 0 and 1? You wouldn't count the tick marks, you would count the spaces. So this would be 1, 2, 3. So if you're thinking of a fraction strip or a fraction circle, this would have 3 total pieces. So with that in mind, if there are 3 total pieces, what would our fraction be for this point here? So if there's 3 total pieces, but we only have this one and this one, so 1, 2, our numerator would be 2, our denominator would be 3, because it would be 2/3. That's 2/3. So knowing that that point is 2/3, that can now help us fill in the rest of the points that are on our number line, okay? So from here, we have 0 to this point is 0 to 2/3. Then we have this one. So our number is less than 1, but we have this fraction over here. So I know with my class, we were talking a lot about what would be equivalent to 1 whole. So if 2/3 is this previous fraction, what would this fraction be? What fraction is equivalent to saying 1 whole? Well, this one would be 3/3. Okay, so if I had all 3 of these spaces filled in, it would be 3/3. Now we got to work our way backwards. So if this is 3/3, 2/3, what would be the next one? Kind of like a pattern. It would be 1/3. And then this one would be 0/3 because we have nothing filled in. So this one would be 1/3, 2/3, 3/3. Okay. So make sure you copy this down on page 232 on number line A. So when you're looking at them, you're looking at how many parts it's divided up. That will give you your denominator or your number on the bottom. That's what that is for, okay? Then where the dot is located is trying to tell you where your numerator or your number on top, how many pieces, what's the distance from 0 to that point, okay? So fill that in for number line A. Number line B is getting into the idea of a number greater than 1. So think of our apple slices. We had half, we had 2 halves, which is 1 whole, and then we had 3 halves, which was 1 whole, and then an extra half. So that number is greater than 1. It's 1.5. So for number line B, we have not from 0 to 1, but 0 to 2. But when you look at it, that's 2 wholes. So we almost have to break it down. So let's just look at the first half, the first one. Now, again, I say half, but that's technically 1 whole, this part here. okay? This is one whole, this is one whole, but it's half of the timeline or half of the number line. So if this part here is one whole, 0 to 1, how many spaces are there in between 0 and 1? We have 1, we have 2. So if we have 2 spaces, what would our whole fraction be? It would be 2 halves, okay? So if this is 2 halves, what do you think the other 2 boxes would be? So fill this one in on your number line. And now what do you think the other 2 boxes would be? Well, this one would be 1/2 because there's only one of the two spaces filled in. And then this one would be 0 halves because nothing would be filled in. So these are your numbers that are less than 1 or equal to 1. Now we got to go to the ones that are greater than 1. So your denominator is going to stay the same, right? Now you're going to count the number of pieces. So if I told you your denominator is staying the same, it'll be over 2. But how many pieces would I have filled in? 1, 2, 3. So I would actually have 3 halves, just like this problem, 3 halves. Now, what would be my total for 2 wholes? It would be 4/2 because that would show that I have 2 wholes. It's like 2 halves and 2 halves equal 2 wholes, okay? So pause the video while you get those filled in. Now for this next part of the video, we are going to do greater than 1 as well. And I don't want to go through this too quickly because of having to do it, together through the video and on your workbook. So we're going to look at number line C and number line D. So for number line C, it has the same thing as our previous one. There are two wholes here. So from 0 to 1 and then 1 to 2. But you need to break it in half, just look at the one whole to figure out how many pieces there are. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I have all 4 pieces, it would be 4/4, which would be our whole number. Now, if this is 4/4, what would our dot be? What would the fraction be for our dot? If one whole is 4/4, the dot there would be 3/4. And then just work your way backwards. You guys know the pattern now. Keep going. Fill in the rest of those. Pause the video while you do that, and then you can start the video to check your answers. So I had 3/4, which would make that one 2/4, 1/4, and 0/4. Because if I had this space here, that's one piece, which is 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. Think of those fraction strips. Now I need to go to my numbers greater than 1. So if I have one whole piece, so 4/4, and I add one more, I would have 5/4. There are 5 pieces, but our denominator, our number on the bottom, stays the same because now we're going greater than 1. So this would be 5/4, and we'll just keep going up, 6/4, 7/4, and now 8/4. Our 2 would be 8/4 because you're doubling it. So 4/4 is 1, 8/4 would be 2 because we doubled it. Okay, so pause the video while you check your answers for that one. And then our number line D. Okay, same thing. It's going from 0 to 2, 2 wholes, but look at how many spaces there are. Okay, so look here. There's 1, 2, 3. So what would our fractions be? We're working with thirds. So what would be our whole number for the 1 if we're working in thirds? It would be 3/3. If I had 3/3, that would equal 1 whole 1. So now I'm going to challenge you. So if this is 3/3, what would this dot be? What would that dot be? If the 1 is 3/3, you need to count 2 more spaces over. it would be 5/3. Okay, so then you fill in from there. So we could do this one would be 4/3 because it's in between 3/3 and 5/3, which would make this one 6/3 because we doubled the 3. And then we would go back down to 2/3, 1/3, and 0/3. So then you have your greater than 1 number line. So the trick with this one is seeing what your number line is telling you. Is it 1? Is it 2? Whatever you're looking at. Then how many spaces are there on that number line? Looking at that. So in this case, you look at the first part of it, which would be 1, 2, 3, or 1, 2, 3, 4. But then when you go to here, you're looking at the whole one. So it really just depends on what your number line looks like and what the labels are on it. But this, again, will help you realize that there are numbers greater than 1 and there are numbers less than 1. So good job, guys.